Right now, a small European country is burning, not just in spirit, in the streets, 6 straight nights, tear gas in the air, barricades on fire, and a crowd of thousands that refuses, no matter what the police do, to go home. The country is Albania. The prime minister is Edi Rama. And the people chanting his name in the streets outside his office are not calling for him to stay, they are calling for him to fall. But this is bigger than one politician. This story runs deeper than one protest. What is happening right now in Albania has American money in it. It has $1 billion real estate deal. It has one of Europe's last untouched coastlines being ripped apart by construction machinery. And it has 30 years of broken promises finally collapsing under their own weight. If you are just finding out about this, you are watching the beginning of something historic. And in the next 15 minutes, you are going to understand every piece of it. Who lit the match, why it spread so fast, and what it means for a country that has been waiting a very long time for a moment like this. Let me paint the picture first, because words do not do it full justice, but we are going to try. Tirana, Albania's capital city, a place that normally moves at the steady pace of a mid-sized European city, 2 million people going about their lives. This week it looks nothing like that. Thick columns of black smoke rising into the night sky, groups of protesters surging through streets lined with riot police holding shields, Molotov cocktails exploding against barricades, water cannons pushing back crowds that refuse to scatter, running battles in neighborhoods that were calm just days ago. And then the footage that pushed this over the edge, clips spreading fast on social media, unverified but impossible to ignore, that appear to show fire consuming a building some are identifying as the private property of Prime Minister Edi Rama. Albanian authorities have not confirmed these specific images, and communication out of certain areas has been restricted, but the mere spread of that footage has done something to the atmosphere in those streets. It has told every single protester that this movement is real, that it has reach, and that the people who run this country can no longer simply pretend they are untouchable. This is not a small group of angry students. This is not a fringe opposition movement. This is an organic, furious uprising that has paralyzed the entire country for nearly a week. And it did not come out of nowhere. Before we go deeper into the story, I need to ask you something directly. If you believe that governments exist to protect their people, not to sell their land to the highest foreign bidder, hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it tells the platform that this story deserves to reach more people. And if you are new here, please subscribe. We cover stories exactly like this one. No corporate backing, no political agenda. Just real events laid out so you can understand what is actually happening in the world. Hit subscribe and let us get into it. The core of this rage, the single decision that poured fuel on 30 years of frustration, is a real estate deal, a big one. In 2023, the Albanian government signed an agreement with Jared Kushner's investment firm, Affinity Partners, for the development of a luxury resort on Sazan Island and the surrounding Vjosa Narta coastline. The deal is reportedly worth more than $1 billion. The plan is to build a world-class tourism destination, 10,000 hotel rooms, new roads, a new city along the water. On paper, you can see the argument. Albania is one of the least developed countries in Europe. It has been trying for years to attract serious foreign investment. A project of this size would create jobs. It would bring tourism revenue. It would put Albania on the map in a way it has never quite managed. The Albanian government made exactly that argument. Prime Minister Rama said publicly, on the record, that this investment will not stop as long as he is in power. He called it a fast track to modernization, a chance to turn Albania into a serious tourism destination. But here is what that argument leaves out. Here is what the protesters know that the press release does not mention. The Vjosa Narta protected landscape is not just any stretch of beach. It is one of the last truly wild river deltas left in all of Europe. The Vjosa River, which flows through this system, is often called the last wild river in Europe. No dams, no channels. It runs completely free from the mountains of the Balkans all the way down to the Adriatic Sea. Scientists travel from around the world to study it. Environmentalists have fought for years to protect it. And the wildlife that depends on it is extraordinary. The critically endangered Mediterranean monk seal lives here, one of the rarest marine mammals on Earth. Loggerhead sea turtles come to these shores to lay their eggs. More than 200 species of birds stop here during their migration between Europe and Africa. And yes, the greater flamingo, pink, unmistakable, and now the symbol of an entire revolution. That is where the name comes from, the Flamingo Revolution, because the protesters do not just want to stop a construction project. They are fighting for the survival of a living, breathing ecosystem that cannot be rebuilt once it is gone. Now here is the detail that changed everything and brought the corruption watchdogs into the picture. This land had protected status. It was designated as a protected European landscape with legal safeguards against development. Then, in 2024, the Albanian parliament passed amendments to the Protected Areas Law that stripped the coastal zone of its legal protections. Those amendments came directly before Kushner's project received preliminary government approval. No open competitive bidding, no public tender, no transparent process. Albania's own independent anti-corruption agency launched an investigation into how the land's protections were removed and whether documents in the approval process were forged. Albania's own watchdog looked at this deal and said something here does not add up. And that brings us to the deeper wound, the one that has been festering for 3 decades. Because you cannot understand why these protests exploded the way they did without understanding what the Albanian people have lived through since the fall of communism. When the communist regime collapsed in the early 1990s, Albania had one of the hardest landings in all of Eastern Europe. The country had been sealed off from the outside world for decades under one of the most isolated dictatorships in history. When the walls came down, it did not transition smoothly. It fell into poverty, into organized crime, into the grip of political elites who treated the country as their personal property. For 30 years, ordinary Albanians watched their leaders talk about reform, while the roads stayed broken and the hospitals stayed underfunded. They watched politicians build villas on hilltops while pensioners counted coins. They watched natural resources, stretches of coastline, forests, rivers, get handed off through backroom deals to whoever had the right connections. The numbers confirm the story the people already knew from lived experience. According to the most recent Corruption Perceptions Index published by Transparency International, Albania scored just 39 out of 100. They dropped 11 places in a single year to rank 91st globally. A year earlier, they had 42 points. Every year, the government talks about reform. Every year, the corruption index gets worse. The report specifically calls out the lack of competitive procedures in the development of the Vjosa Narta area by name in direct reference to this project. 30 years of this, and then the government tried to sell the last clean corner of the coastline to a foreign developer through a process even their own anti-corruption agency flagged as suspect. The fuse had been lit a long time ago. The Vjosa Narta deal was simply the match that finally reached it. Here is what should genuinely impress you about what is happening in these streets, because this is not random chaos. Watch the footage carefully and you start to see something different. Organization, discipline, a movement that knows exactly what it is doing and why. It started locally. Residents of the communities along the Vjosa Narta coastline watched the construction machinery arrive on their beach. They took out their phones, they filmed it, they posted it, they called people they knew in Tirana. Those people called their friends. Social media groups that had been dormant for years suddenly lit up. Environmental activists who had been fighting this project in courts and government hearings for months finally had footage that everyone could see and no one could deny. Within days, what had started as a local coastal protest became a nationwide shutdown. For 6 consecutive nights, the center of Tirana was locked down. The protesters moved not just with the energy of a crowd, but with a clear understanding of the city's geography and what it meant symbolically. The Prime Minister's office sits on Martyrs of the Nation Boulevard. Police set up heavy defensive lines at the main approaches. But the protesters did not just charge the front gates and bounce off the barricades. Secondary groups moved through the side streets, working around the security lines, outflanking positions that the police thought were secure. Reports emerged that protesters breached the outer perimeter of Rama's private residential compound. If the unverified footage circulating online is authentic, the security apparatus did not just fail to stop the protests, it failed to protect the Prime Minister's own front door. That is not a minor embarrassment. That is a signal that the state no longer has complete control of what happens in those streets. This is what happens when a movement is not just angry but organized, and when a population has been storing that anger for a very long time. Now let us talk about the piece of this story that has gone global in a different way. Because while the protests were exploding over the Vjosa Narta deal, a separate incident on the same coastline set off an international alarm. In the middle of the unrest, footage emerged showing what appears to be a Greek national being physically restrained and dragged down onto the sand by security forces in the Vjosa Narta area. The clip spread quickly. Athens took immediate notice. The relationship between Greece and Albania has always been complicated. The Greek minority in southern Albania has been a politically sensitive issue between the two governments for decades. The sight of footage showing a Greek citizen being treated that way in the middle of a nationally visible controversy was not something Greece was going to ignore. Athens demanded answers. The Rama government, already fighting for its survival at home, is now handling questions from a neighboring European Union member state at exactly the moment when it can least afford a diplomatic crisis. This is what total political pressure looks like. You cannot fight two fires at once when both fires are burning at the same time. And the international dimension does not stop there. Environmental organizations from across Europe have issued statements. EU officials have noted publicly that environmental standards are a condition of Albania's EU membership process. A project that Albania's own corruption agency is investigating on land whose protected status was stripped under suspicious circumstances is not the kind of story that goes away quietly on the European political stage. So where does all of this go from here? That is the question everyone is asking and no one can fully answer yet. Prime Minister Rama has not resigned. As of now, he has doubled down. His public position remains that the Kushner investment will continue. Kushner's company has issued a statement describing the resort as an opportunity to create a world-class destination, one of the largest private investments in the region's history. They note that an environmental impact study still needs to be completed and a final proposal submitted before any construction permit can be issued. But the streets of Tirana tell a different story than the press statements. The windows in the city center are boarded up. The barricades are still burning. The chant that echoes through the boulevards does not sound like a movement that is planning to go home quietly. Before we get to the final piece of this story, I want to say something directly to anyone who has made it this far. This kind of coverage does not exist without the people who support it. We put out these videos because we believe the stories that matter most are often the ones that get the least attention from mainstream sources. If that means something to you, subscribing is genuinely the single most powerful thing you can do for us. It costs you nothing, and it changes everything about what we can do. Hit subscribe. It takes 2 seconds, and it means we can keep doing this. Here is the truth of what is happening in Albania, stripped all the way down to its core. A government took a piece of land that belonged to the people. Land that scientists had documented, that environmental laws had protected, that families had lived beside for generations, and it handed that land to a foreign developer through a process that its own corruption agency immediately flagged. No fair tender, no public debate, no real consent. The people said no. They went to the beaches with signs, they filed legal challenges, they organized peaceful demonstrations, they tried to make their voice heard through every proper channel available to them. The government said the deal is done, and the people said, then we will make it matter. 6 nights, tear gas, fire, police barricades, and crowds that would not break. And over all of it, echoing off the walls of a capital city that has seen a lot of history, one chant that will not stop. Albania is not for sale. That is not just about a resort. It is not just about flamingos and monk seals, as important as those things are. It is about whether a government has the right to sell what belongs to all of its people to benefit a small group of people who are already powerful and already wealthy. It is about whether 30 years of patience has finally run out, and it is about whether the people who live in a country get the final say over what happens to the land beneath their feet. Albania is not for sale. And however this ends, that chant is not going to be forgotten. We will keep following this story as it develops. Now, here is my question for you, and I want a real answer in the comments. The Albanian government says this resort will bring jobs, economic growth, and put the country on the map for international tourism. The protesters say the environmental cost is too high, the process was corrupt, and the deal should be scrapped entirely. Both sides believe they are right. So where do you stand? When a country desperately needs investment and $1 billion deal is on the table, how do you decide whether the environmental and democratic cost is worth it? Is there a version of this deal that could have been done the right way, or was this land simply never for sale at any price? Drop your answer below. Every single comment gets read, and if you think this story deserves more eyes on it, share this video. That is how stories like this actually reach the people who need to hear them.